Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episode 12 of season 1 of Arrow called Trust But Verify. Now, I was a little let down by last week's episode, but this week's episode, this is what I was looking for. This is the show that we've missed. There is so much cool stuff going on. This is a really well, let's just say, in terms of the mythology of the show, this is a really great episode. In terms of the story, basic story itself, nah, not so great, but there's a lot to talk about, and I'm really excited for this episode. So, I have my notes, I have some nice refreshing water, so let's just dive right on in. Now, the title of the episode is one that I think does bear a quick remarking on. Remarking, is that a word? I don't think it is. Unfortunately, I'm not Stephen Colbert, so I don't think I can quite get away with trademarking that particular turn of phrase right here and there, so let's just soldier on, eh? Now, trust but verify. Now, this is a phrase that's been around for for a couple of decades now, but to the best of my knowledge, this was actually coined by former President Ronald Reagan. And given the very paranoid times that the 1980s were in America, it's a very, very reasonable stance to take. And well, let's face it, paranoia has hardly gone away in modern society, in America and, well, in the world in general. We live in interesting times. But nonetheless, obviously a very apt title for what we have going on here. Now, let's just sort of dive right in, start talking about the characters, and then we'll sort of talk about the plot a little bit more. Since he's the one-shot character this episode, and the character brought in from the greater DC universe, let's talk about Ted Gaynor, played by a slightly chunky-looking Ben Browder. He, of course, best known as Crichton from Farscape, a show that I've slowly started to get into. I haven't had the chance to watch too many episodes of the show yet, but it's definitely moved up on my list of shows to start watching, just based on some reviews of it that I've been checking out recently. He was, of course, actually on, of all shows, Doctor Who last year, playing the sheriff in the American town that the Doctor visits with Amy and Rory. Quite a good episode, and one that I reviewed here on this channel. But anyway, Ted Gaynor, his character is indeed from the comics. He's a member of the Blackhawks, who were basically a group of World War II era badass pilots slash, just badasses in general. Now, the interesting thing about Ted, and I looked him up on the DC Comics wiki before I did this review, is that, like here in the show, he basically did a face heel turn. He was a member of the good guys for a while, but then he sort of changed sides. Although here it was more just greed and selfishness. For the comics, at least according to the wiki, it was more a case of he was just really too reckless and dangerous, and that's what ultimately pushed him to the other side. Now, I've not read any of the comics with this character, so I have no real opinion about him. Now, as for Ben Browder's performance, well, what he had to work with, let's be honest, wasn't the strongest of material. But, Ben Browder is a very, very good actor. He definitely makes the most of what he has. Interesting to see him really going with that southern accent. Now, I've seen enough Farscape to know that Crichton does occasionally, when he's emotional, kind of slip into that. And of course, Browder himself is a native of North Carolina. Now, I've got a lot of family who are from Southern Virginia, and I mean so far south in Virginia, it practically is North Carolina. And I even still have some family that lives there today. So I've spent a little time in that area, and North Carolina is an interesting place. Just depending on where you are in that state, just how strong the local accent can vary a pretty surprising bit. Now here, I've not really seen too much stuff of Ben Browder just being Ben Browder, so I can't really say how authentic his accent is. But it sounds like I think he might be exaggerating it just a little bit. But of course, the whole thing of Ted turning out to be a bad guy in the end. Well, we all saw that coming. But this was never meant to be. Ted Gaynor was never really meant to be somebody who was going to be an ongoing antagonist. He was a one-shot villain who got killed with one shot. The real things here is that he brings a chance for some serious conflict between Oliver and Dig. And first of all, I have to say, I was a little annoyed at the very beginning when these two guys start arguing, because the idea that is later brought up of Dig going into Black Hawk security to find out whether or not Ted is dirty or not. You think these two guys would have just sort of said that at the very beginning. And the fact that they neither one of them even tried to compromise really says a lot about both Oliver and Dig. These are two guys who are absolutely firmly rooted in their positions like trees. But to continue that metaphor, trees are powerful and strong because they bend instead of break. And I'm not kidding. If I can continue to run with this possibly somewhat ridiculous metaphor for a moment, when I was in high school, I took driver's ed like a lot of people did. Now, one interesting thing my driver's ed teacher told me in class was, let me speak slowly and clearly. He asked us in class one day, all right, let's say you're driving, your car loses control. You have the choice of crashing into a brick wall or a tree. Which should you try and aim for? Well, most of us said aim for the tree. Our teacher explained to us, no, that's wrong. You don't want to do that. Because a brick wall, if you hit it with a car, it will give, it will collapse. A tree is rooted into the ground. It will bend, but it will not move. And it will be your car that ends up wrapping around that tree. And that's true. That's one of the reasons that trees can survive so well, is that in storms, below like hurricane and tornado and like super crazy stuff, they will bend with the wind rather than break. And it's even true all the way up to skyscrapers. So this inability to bend is ultimately what comes and bites both Oliver and Dig in the ass. But it's this crisis of trust. That might even go a little too far. It is. These two guys do obviously trust each other. Oliver would never have let Dig know who he was as the vigilante if he didn't. But it's this inability to compromise, basically it's just the inability to compromise that really sort of gets in there. And ultimately, this leads to tragedy. Carly gets kidnapped, which is certainly not a fun experience. Dig is forced to turn on a man who saved his life, who he placed enormous trust, only to have that trust betrayed. Yes, that's trust betrayed by somebody that you put a lot of faith in. Wow, that's a reoccurring theme in this episode too, isn't it? But at the end of the day, Oliver and Dig's relationship is ultimately stronger for it. And that's a good thing, because even with friends, even with the people we trust the most, sometimes there are very serious disagreements. Sometimes there are moments when we feel like our friends have not done right for us. Sometimes when they feel like they have abused our trust or misused our trust. A writer on Buffy the Vampire Slayer talking about the characters actually even said the alliances are always shifting. In fact, that was actually Jane Espenson, and I know that was her because she came and spoke to at my college one time, and I asked her about how they handled the characterization and the interactions on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and those are the exact words that she used. And I have to say, she was actually a very, very excellent speaker. I was super thrilled to get the chance to do that. But anyway, let's continue on. One thing I do like was that Dig, of course, noticed the bug that Oliver planted on him. He said, I like that little line. And the next time you plant a bug on somebody, be more subtle about it. And I also liked it when Oliver mixed it up with Knox. he pulls out those two knives and he and Oliver go at it. Very, very reminiscent of some of the exact same training that Oliver has done with Dig. And Oliver still has that neck snap down. That's the third guy he's killed with that since the show began. I mean, yeah, Dig is a very formidable guy, but Oliver is still on top of him. Now, moving on. As long as we're talking about Dig, let's finish up talking about his storyline here. And we're okay, slow down. All right. So one thing that Gaynor brings up is that Carly is attracted to Dig, and this really isn't a surprise to me. I kind of, from the very beginning of seeing these two interact, I kind of wondered if maybe this is where they were going to go. And it looks like, since it was brought up, that this will go somewhere. I have faith enough in the writers for that. And this creates another very interesting parallel between Oliver and Dig, in similarity to how Oliver might have felt when he came back and saw Walter. Now, this is, of course, naturally different. Dig is considering, well, should I pursue a relationship with my ex-sister-in-law? But still, there's this family awkwardness, and it's even mentioned that Carly has a son. So you have to think there is another potential for some very weird family dynamics to come into play. Something that, Oliver would be the person that Dig would probably want to go and talk to about that. Now, again, I'm speculating a little bit, but I have the feeling that the show brought this up for a reason. So that's something I think we're going to be looking forward to in terms of what's going to be going on with Dig's character. Now, to finish things up with him, one thing that sort of puzzled me about this is Dig being surprised that Ted's name was on the list. Now, I really was surprised that Dig had just not said, "Hey, Oliver, can I see that book and see whose all name is in it?" I mean, you really would think that once he signed up for this partner to a vigilante thing, that would be one of the first things that he did. Apparently not. Maybe Dig is placing a little bit more trust in Oliver than I'd given him credit for. But at the end where he says, don't tell me a name until we're ready to go after someone. I mean, ouch. What a... That is really very telling of, even though we might not be showing it, that's really telling you a lot about the pain that is going inside of Dig at that very moment. And keep in mind, he saw his friend get killed by his other friend right in front of him. Now, Dig's a soldier, so it's not unreasonable to think that this is not the first time something like that's happened to him. But seeing someone who you had placed so much trust in, and who had betrayed that trust, and was going to harm your family, was getting ready to kill him, only to watch that guy die at the hands of his other friend. But at the end of the day, doesn't that really tell you a lot more about who Dig's true friend really was? Okay, so let's move on, and we need to talk about Thea. Now, one criticism of this show that I've seen people make on the forums, around the internet, and in various places, is that Thea's use of drugs has really not been... Excuse me a sec. There we go. Has really not been touched on very much since the very beginning of the show. And you know what? That's a valid point. But let's take a look at the way Thea has interacted with her family, particularly Oliver. And let's think about what the first episodes, when we were watching this, told us about why Thea was taking drugs in the first place. And that amounted to, she didn't really have a good relationship with her mom. She didn't really have that great of a relationship with Walter. Oliver was gone. Her dad was gone. But over the course of the last dozen or so episodes, we've seen that change. Thea now has a stronger relationship with her mom. She has a good relationship with Walter. She and Oliver have really kind of not exactly picked up where they left off, but they've gotten to a point where they're reasonably comfortable with each other. And what those really episodes were really telling us is that Thea was using drugs basically to escape from the pain of her family life. So it's really not so surprising that as her family life improved, that she would have fewer and fewer reasons to turn to that sort of thing. Now, that guy that she brought to her room does seem to indicate that she may not have totally sworn off youthful indiscretions, but, 17, 18-year-old girl, there are just certain things that are to be expected of a girl that age in the year 2013. But anyway, moving on. So here it is. We see Thea basically feel like that her mother has betrayed her trust. And keep in mind that Malcolm Merland is a longtime family friend, basically one of her parents' closest friends. So it's not unreasonable to think that Thea has at least, did probably at some point in her life at least like Malcolm to the degree that a lot of kids like the friends of their parents. So of course she's hit with what she feels is an enormous betrayal, and well, when that happens, she's in that vulnerable place where she's willing to turn to drugs once again. Now, of course, the drugs are called Vertigo, and if you've been following the information about the series, then you have some idea where we're going to be going with this pretty soon. But I don't want to say anything about that for folks who are very adamant in any way, shape, or form about anything that even looks like a spoiler. So we'll save that discussion for later on. But Thea getting arrested at the end of the episode, yeah, that's definitely something that Oliver is not going to take too kindly to, and he's certainly not going to let this situation stand as it is. And it kind of makes me wonder if we won't see Laurel turn up as Thea's attorney. Though you have to wonder, though, don't the Queens probably have like an army of lawyers at this point? But hey, maybe not. Anyway, moving on. Oh yeah, speaking of Dig briefly, I did like the fact that he actually threw out the word Arrow Cave. Now that is what Green Arrow's lair is called in the comics, so seeing that worked in there, that was a real treat. Okay, since I brought him up just a minute ago, let's move on and talk about Malcolm Merlyn. Now, this is a very good episode for us to sort of get a deeper read on Malcolm. So far, he's just basically been treated as Tommy's bastard dad. He's, of course, the Dark Archer. He's a very ruthless guy, kidnapped Walter, has threatened Moira, has sent an assassin to murder Oliver. Just basically straight up villain, villain, villain. Here, with him via Tommy particularly, we start to get some insight into just who he is beneath all of that. Now we get the extremely interesting revelation that Malcolm's wife and Tommy's mother was murdered, shot in the head, as they said, at some point when Tommy was about 8 years old. So, okay, first of all, I gotta say, that's a very blatant. Your mom shot dead when you're 8 years old. Okay, in the DC universe, that's basically Batman shtick. I mean, granted, his dad also died along with it, but mom, 8 years old, bullet to the head. That's pure Batman right there. But of course, here we see, in a way, what might have happened to Thomas Wayne if he had been, if he had also survived. And I think that's actually an extraordinarily interesting idea, if that's what the writers are going for. And I can't help but think that it is. Tommy even says, my dad disappeared for about 1 or 2 years, most likely to go off and train to become the Dark Archer. And remember, when Malcolm did fight Oliver, he sort of mentioned that he worked for somebody, that there was someone higher up on the chain than him. So you have to wonder, did that person have Malcolm's wife killed? Is that the reason why he is so adamant that things be done his way? Who is this person? what's going on there. And another thing, of course, is that I was wondering while I was watching this is why does Malcolm have this enormous mad-on to close down the free clinic that his wife started? And why in the world does he need Tommy's signature to do that? That doesn't really make sense, but I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just going to let that one slide. Now, my thinking on this is that, one, Malcolm is a billionaire. Whatever it's costing him to run this clinic has to be a drop in the bucket. Now, if you think about that compared to the bad publicity that a billionaire is going to get for shutting down a free clinic, it's certainly a storm he can weather, but really, why bother? The public doesn't really forget stuff like that. And in this day and age, somebody rich basically cutting money to a free clinic, well, it may not make national news, but word's going to get around. So why is he doing this? And the thing that comes to my mind is he's simply trying to get rid of anything at all that reminds him of his wife. The way this episode explains it sort of sounds like the clinic is named after his wife. So you have to think that anytime he has to deal with any sort of business relating to this clinic, it's his wife's name right there in front of him. And if you've lost people in your life, just sometimes even hearing their name can really bring that pain back. And if that's the case, then it really does add some very interesting depth to what's going on with Malcolm as a character. I mean, just the fact that he'd do something like this just so he doesn't have to see his wife's name on a regular basis. I mean, geez, what a knife to the heart that must be every time if he's willing to do something like this. Now, it also begs the question, what are Malcolm's real feelings towards Tommy? And I actually do think that Tommy's wrong here. Now, granted, Malcolm is a real bastard and a first-rate manipulator, extremely ruthless man, but I think he was actually being genuine, despite his secondary motivations, when he said that he wanted to mend fences with Tommy. And that, again, also adds some real depths to his character. I mean, it is very basic stuff in terms of writing villains that, even bad people have people that they care about, have people that they love. Now, this isn't the case of every bad person in the world, certainly. But if you do that, then it does add a very simple and realistic way of adding depth to a character. As for Tommy himself, not really a whole lot to go on. We're just sort of continuing the struggle that he's going through for his dad's acceptance, and we kind of maybe turn a little bit of a corner here with Tommy finally saying, basically, that I'm washing my hands of my father. And Tommy's, for the first time in his life, really in a position where he might be able to do that. He's got a job, he's got a steady girlfriend, and he's a grown man. He has to go out there and stand on his own 2 feet, and he's really in that position where he can make that change in his life. And it is a very empowering time for him. So it's really not a wonder that he's so diving into making Oliver's nightclub the real thing, which again adds some very nice richness to Tommy as a character. Let's see. Since I mentioned Tommy's girlfriend, let's talk about the delightful Laurel Lance. And not really a whole lot for Laurel going on with Laurel here. We did get to see her chat a little bit with Malcolm. Certainly some very potentially interesting sparks there. I mean, Laurel's certainly one of the good guys, and Malcolm one of the bad guys. And I can't help but think that these two are going to come to clash in some form or fashion again before this season's out. But beyond that, yeah, we do get a brief cameo, of course, by Quentin Lance, but really nothing to say about him this time around. Moira and what's going on with her. Now, Moira is somebody who's sort of really been oscillating quite a bit this season. She's been presented as being an extremely ruthless person. I mean, she hired some guys to kidnap her son and his best friend, and these are guys who are willing to torture Oliver to get information out of him. I mean, seriously, stop and think about it. She hired guys who were, taking a stun gun to her only child, who, until recently, she had every reason in the world to think was dead. But we've also seen her, behaving very lovingly as a mother, as a wife, trying to help her kids, trying to help her husband, trying to protect Walter and everybody from essentially Malcolm. So, and of course we've seen at times that she's genuinely, seriously terrified of Malcolm. But this constant back and forth has actually made Moira grow a little bit of a spine. She's, in very subtle ways, shown Malcolm that he can't totally push her around. But Malcolm's been the biggest guy on the playground for a really long time and knows how to play this game better than Moira, which is why, of course, poor Walter is now his prisoner. But, of course, we do get the confirmation that Walter is alive. But I do like that Malcolm sort of pays Moira a little compliment when she demands proof of life in regards to Walter, and even throws the whole trust but verify thing in his face. Did you notice how approving Malcolm was of that? So, yeah, that is an extremely interesting dynamic between those two. Let me see here. Oliver himself. Well, we've really talked quite a bit about his conflict with Dig, and I think that was basically the main crux of what was going on in this episode. Now, what was going on with Oliver in the flashbacks on the island? Well, we do again get to see that Oliver is starting to pick up some of that resourcefulness that he's going to need as Green Arrow. He, he successfully evades the little verbal trap that Eddie Friars throws out at him. He's able to bluff his way into getting a ride to the prison. But again, he's up against Eddie Friars, somebody who's way more experienced than he is at playing games like this. And, even though he manages to basically luck his way through a few things, ultimately Eddie drops the boom on him and does it pretty spectacularly. And then at the very end, it's even shown to Oliver that seemingly Yao Fei has betrayed him. Now, there's more There's more going on here than meets the eye. Transformers. I really can't help but think that this is something. This is not what it seems. Is basically what I think is. I have to say. So I'll save judgment on that for until we have some more information. But just the idea that Eddie Friars would stage all of this is some sort of elaborate ruse to trap Oliver. It really just does not make sense that he would go through all this trouble at this point, when as soon as he got a hold of Oliver for the first time, he had absolutely no problem, just basically having him tied up and tortured. Now, if Yao Fei hadn't actually done things to help Oliver and save his life, why would Oliver have not done whatever Eddie wanted? So yeah, this doesn't really make sense. Let me see here. Looking at my notes. Oh yeah, going back to Dig and Oliver. I did like the fact that Dig brings up a very good point of, well, okay, basically saying, well, haven't you ever questioned who was on this list? It was obviously written by people who were bad. And Oliver kind of points out, well, everybody on the list so far has turned out to be bad, so I have no reason to question this. Plus, all that stuff with his dad. And Oliver it turns out that Oliver's right. Ted Gainer's a bad guy. So I do like that this is a very logical point, and I like that it's brought up and that it's addressed. So from now on, we really have no good reason not to think that anybody Oliver goes after from that list is almost certainly a bad guy. Now let's see. Getting back to what's going on with Oliver. I like how when he broke into Blackhawk security, he used knockout darts. Now, one of the criticisms they had of Oliver at the very beginning was he was shooting and killing guys, or at least seriously injuring guys who were basically seemed like security guards, people who may not have known that the people that they were working for were bad. And as a hero, Oliver should not be doing stuff like that. Now, granted, some people say, well, as a hero, Oliver shouldn't be killing people in the first place, but if you take that as we're dealing with a superhero who will sometimes kill, then, well, sometimes he actually is going to have to kill. So we're just going to have to let that point go. This is not the straight up DC universe where superheroes will not kill except under the most extraordinary of circumstances. All right, we are dealing with a much more gritty and harsh DC universe with at least so far people with no superpowers. Let me see here. Yes, I almost forgot. We got to see Felicity once again. And Felicity is obviously a very smart girl. When Oliver brought her that laptop full of bullet holes, she clearly did not buy the idea that his coffee shop is in a bad neighborhood. So now the question is raised, how much longer can this keep going on before Felicity puts two and two together and realizes that she's basically serving as, if you're familiar with the comics, the character of Oracle for Oliver, or basically his go-to hacker girl. I mean, after this, come on. Dig even says that what the word is that the vigilantes stopped the armored car robbers at the end of the episode. So if he heard about it, wait, I think I might be getting that wrong. Well, anyway, Felicity can't keep going on too much longer without putting together that Oliver has some connection to the vigilante or to something seriously weird. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens when that comes to a head. And yeah, I actually think that covers everything that I have to say. Again, very solid episode, lots of twists, turns. We get some really interesting character insight into a lot of people. There's so many balls in the air. Things are coming. We're getting payoffs, and then we're immediately getting setups for other things. I mean, this is really just really, really well-written TV, and I love watching the show, and I certainly enjoy sitting down with you guys to talk about it. And with that said, folks, we're going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at HoosierJedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.